If you want to do things fast, Leon, very simple. I would say today, my advice to every civil servant in Malaysia, do 3 things.
Welcome to the Game of Impossible podcast. My name is Leon and this is my dad, Idris Jala. We are a father and son podcast where we discuss all things transformation through the lens of business, leadership, sport, and faith. Today, I thought we would talk about this idea of big, fast results. But I think the difference today is I want to talk about big, fast results through the lens of simplicity versus complexity. I think sometimes there's this false notion that in order for us to be intelligent is to be able to do complicated things. But I've been reading this book by Matt Alverson and Andre Spicer called The Stupidity Paradox. And I was challenged by this quote, and they said that the smartest people are often the best at playing stupid games, crafting elaborate presentations, endless strategies, and dazzling with jargon while avoiding real change. Now, they spend a great deal of this book firing some of these shots at consultants and the consulting fraternity at large. And so that got me to think, are we sometimes prone to making some of these mistakes? And how do we then counter that with the spirit of big, fast results? Maybe let's start with talking about simplicity and moving the needle. Why is big, fast results important and how does that play out in the work that you do?
Well, Leon, I would say 2 things are very, very important. In life, there is a lot of frustration when things are very, very, very slow. You want to get at something, there are so many hindrances along the way that delays you from getting it. The frustration is there. We call it, generally, it's called bureaucracy. And so, to your point, the word stupidity, sometimes the bureaucracy, the processes are totally unnecessary. So that's one, the delay and the slow response to getting things that you want. The other one is incrementalism. People that don't think about big results. Everything is slow, small, because they're worried about risks. So those 2 things are the reasons why I talk about big, fast results. They want to be big rather than incremental. That means you take some risks, but you manage the risk, but your returns, the results are big. But at the same time, you want it to get really, really fast. How do you crush the lead time? Remove the unnecessary bureaucracy. That really is the philosophy behind this. So in my mind, when you start to think like that, it's like turning a book. You turn it from the right rather than the left. That means you start with the outcome in mind. If you focus on the results, you should ask the question, if I do this, what is the outcome that I really intend to get at? If I'm clear about the outcome, then you realize some of the processes are redundant, totally unnecessary to get to the outcome, because somebody has been designing the processes for very, very different reasons, for control, for perfection, for other things that they are trying to do, for sophistication, but it's not at all addressing the elephant in the room. What is the result you're trying to derive at? So if you're clear about the results, I think many things are superfluous.
And I think it's important to note that because I think often the problem with over sophistication is, let's take, for example, a lot of the work that we do with governments. So if we were to have very sophisticated kind of plans, I think that probably works at the high level when we're engaging with prime ministers and key ministers. But the reality is, in order for things to move into implementation and to actually take effect, the reality is, first of all, you have to be able to connect these plans with the general public. That's one. So people at the grassroots should also be able to understand and be on board with what you are wanting to do and these plans and these different ways that you plan to implement. But also, the reality is that you would also need to have your civil service who are able to then follow these plans. If we overcomplicate, if we add too many layers, then what that does is it actually, as you said, the bureaucracy actually ends up becoming a hindrance for us to effect actual change. Now, how do you draw this line then between sophistication and simplification in the context of consulting?
Well, there are two things that we do in PEMANDU. We begin by saying big, fast result is our mantra. And because of that, we continuously find a way to reduce the lead time, stop the dribbling, focus on scoring the outcome. And the second thing is really get people to put forward audacious target, because with the audacious target, the impossible goals that we talk about forces the organization, which is our client and ourselves, to radically find new ways of doing it to achieve those outcomes. Let me just come something close to home so that we don't become theoretical in this discussion. You know, you look at it, Malaysia and Singapore are one country before, and we divorced each other. So we went our own separate ways, they went their own separate ways. Everybody in the world, including Lee Kuan Yew, had actually thought that they had a very difficult task. They didn't have natural resources at hand. Years and years later, today, you can see the difference. They have progressed so far ahead as a high-income nation compared to ours. We can give all sorts of excuses because, you know, we are much more complicated and all sorts of things. But let's just come down to one very simple thing. The World Bank ranks all the countries in the world on one thing. They call it ease of doing business. Year after year after year, the number one country in the world on ease of doing business is Singapore. Year after year after year. And then they sit next to us. And that is the one thing that has made the difference, to unleash the private sector, allowing the private sector to invest in their country, because they make it so simple. We make it...
What are some of the ways that...
For example, how to register a company. You can do registering a company in one day in Singapore. And how long it takes here. Putting up a building. Our process, I think in the world, the last time I looked at it, we were ranked 120 in the world for construction approval. All sorts of things. Paying taxes is very complicated in Malaysia. Even to pay money to government also difficult because the process is complicated. In Singapore, paying taxes is very simple. Many things are simple. And so the ruler that the World Bank uses altogether 10 of them. Registering a business, paying taxes, cross-border trade, all sorts of things. Getting electricity is one of them, by the way. All these are part of the 10. But you know, when you think about it, we have so many licenses. Give one example. I had quickly looked today. How many licenses are required for someone to build a petrol station in Malaysia and operate it? And compared to Singapore, if you want to build a petrol station in Singapore, what are the approvals required? And you want to open up a petrol station and run it, what are the approvals required? I check here. In the case of Malaysia, we have 20 licenses approval from land and planning, building and construction, from fuel business, selling petrol, from a convenience store, from halal certification, from having a car wash, all of these things altogether 20 licenses. By contrast, Singapore 10. Of course, you need sophistication, you need to check people don't cut corners, but you could see half. So this is an example of you can make life difficult for yourself. You can make it simpler. In the year 2010, Leon, we gathered 500 representatives from the private sector in Malaysia, including government representatives, and we put them in 12 labs running concurrently, economic labs. They were altogether 131 entry point projects. And when we asked them, every single one of those private sector projects, we asked them, what is standing in the way of you realizing these projects, making real? 70% of the problems were just government bureaucracy. 70%. We've done labs, economic labs in so many other countries, in Nigeria, in Oman, in Russia, in Ethiopia. It's the same phenomenon. Some countries even more, 90% government bureaucracy. Now, when you want to simplify it, how do you simplify it? If Malaysia are serious about wanting to simplify and approach PEMANDU today as consulting, how do we leapfrog and improve the ease of doing business? It's very, very, very simple, Leon. 3 steps only. Take the Singapore process and system of doing it. Step 2, remove the name Singapore, put Malaysia. Step number 2. Step number 3, get the team to say, this is the new process and system that we are going to use. Please check it and localize it. Make the adaptation to suit local circumstances. But the rule is, do not make it worse than the current, what is drafted there. You find ways to even improve it further. That's all. That is a role of a consulting firm that focuses on BFR. Don't go and waste time thinking about complicated ways of doing it. So if I put that, the 3 steps, doesn't take you long to do. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's already there. It's proven. Just take it. I call it blanco, cut and paste. Take that, put the name of Malaysia there and localize it towards improvement. Don't complicate it further. That is all that's needed. It does not take you 6 months to do this. It takes you 6 weeks to do it in a lab. And frankly, I call that quantum leap. Quantum leap is taking the frontier best practice. Take another example, Leon. I'm most frustrated every time I travel to every country. The biggest frustration I have is queuing out immigration. I always find that the most unpleasant activity, every time you go for a nice holiday, it begins with a terrible queuing up at immigration. But where is the best practice in doing this? I cite you one very big one. In the whole of Europe, 27 countries in Europe have signed an agreement called Schengen Agreement. 27 countries. So if you go to Europe today, you arrive, let's say in Paris, you fly to Paris, you enter and you fill your normal immigration form, etc. And once they have given it to you in Paris, you can travel freely to any of the other European countries, 27 of them, without filling any form, without queuing up, nothing doing. You enter as if you're in a state of Malaysia. That is what they have done. And they've done this for so long, and it works. And also, for those people who live within the 27 countries, they don't even need to fill any form. They just travel within. No need to do embarkation, no need to fill any of those forms. So life goes on. So that's one really best practice. So if ASEAN were to do that, ASEAN, we talk ourselves, go beyond lovey-dovey. If all the ASEAN countries were to sign an agreement like that, all the people within ASEAN can travel freely without queuing and filling a form. We don't have to look far. Just look at how they do in Europe. Let me take another example. Every single day, thousands and thousands of Malaysians are cursing the authorities as they move between Singapore and Johor. Every single day, people working in Singapore from Johor. Where is the best practice for doing this? Canada and USA. We call it common CIQ. Common quarantine, immigration, and checkpoint. So when you put all this together, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's already done in Canada and USA. If you do that today and adapt that today, the problem happening every single day is gone, just like that, right at the checkpoint. So if you want to do things fast, Leon, it's very simple. I would say today, my advice to every civil servant today in Malaysia, do 3 things. Go and check and just ask the question, if I work in whichever department in the government, check on ChatGPT or DeepSeek, ask the question, which is the best practice in the world for doing this government service and they will give you the answer. Step number one. Number two, take it, the detail, ask them to give you the detailed processes. Blanco it, put the name Malaysia. Step three, localize it and improve it and implement. That is all that's needed. So if you do this, suddenly we leapfrog. We are straight into frontier. You don't have to go and spend so long revamping the current processes. It would take many, many light years before you make the improvement.
We tend to celebrate complexity sometimes, not because there are stupid people, but actually because there are genuinely smart people who are fit into maybe certain systems that almost expect us to fall in line and to do this kind of, in their words, the stupid thing. So one example is, and maybe it'd be interesting to discuss this, the point you mentioned earlier, actually sometimes the quickest and simplest plan could be done in just a matter of minutes. You mentioned going onto ChatGPT, asking it to come up with the best practice and then just contextualize it ever so slightly. That essentially already gives you the plan and the strategy. That's why at PEMANDU, we always focus on implementation because the plans themselves, they're never going to be complete rocket science. Maybe sometimes people feel that they need to overcomplicate because I think society at large still looks at time charging, and the workforce generally, clients generally look at value based on time spent on a project. Do you think that is maybe something that hinders big, fast results, and sometimes taking the simpler approach, which might take a lot faster, but actually prove to be more valuable in the future?
The time charge for us is mainly because we want to charge clients, because the clients want to know, did you actually spend this amount of effort and time?
Well, exactly. But if in reality, thing only took
other than
5
that,
seconds,
you don't need to do that. But really what you need to do is to figure out a way how to get rid of the activities, because you don't need unnecessary activities. Take an example, Leon. All companies spend a lot of effort writing their annual report. They're very thick. Some go to 600, 400 pages.
Yep. The bane of every comms and marketing team, the annual report.
You ask question, how many people read this stuff? So if you ask 200 people, you are lucky to say 10 people read it. Okay, then you ask the 10 people. Those people who read this, which of these, the whole document, which are the pages that you really look at? They probably say out of the 900 pages, they only read 10 pages. Why don't you just reduce the number to 10 pages? Since only 10 out of 100 people read it, of the 10 people, they're only reading 10 pages. Why don't you just reduce the pages to 10 and circulate only to the 10 people that are really meant rather than to a wide range of people? You don't need all these things. So the question today is that, why do you need the annual report to begin with? What is the true north for the annual report? Then you really fundamentally, what's the outcome that you desire for it? Really, then you start from there. Then you suddenly realize you don't need to do this, you don't need to do this. But there are people who are out there whose job it is in an organization, they just want to beautify the annual report. All day long, every year, there's a group of people in the whole organization. Every year, they want to improve it. They add new chapters to it. They complicate it. All sorts of things coming in there. Nobody in an organization said, oh, what we will now do is that let's get rid of things that are unnecessary.
Yeah, there's a difference between mere busyness and fruitfulness. And I think sometimes we can confuse the two. I know in the past I've been guilty of this myself, in thinking that in order for my bosses to see that I'm adding value to the company, I need to appear very busy. Dribbling as opposed to scoring, because it will show that I'm making full use of my office time. When the reality is actually at the end of the day, all I have done is I've done some very fancy stepovers, but I've not actually scored the goal.
Yeah, it's true.
How do you then present value then? Let's say let's take a different stance now. Let's say that you are someone in the workforce, and that you're maybe you're in a company where there's a bit of this culture of you're expected to put in long hours and your value to the company is attributed to amount of time you spend in the office. There are still companies that operate like this. If you're in that kind of environment, then how do you position yourself well to your superiors, your bosses, by getting them to focus on value and deliverables over time and busyness?
Yeah, you use the word value deliverables. Absolutely, begin right there. You have a real discussion with the bosses about the value, what's the outcome.
How might you have that discussion?
So we said, boss, I've been thinking very hard about the things that we are doing. I really realize that some of the things that we do really lead to the outcome and the results. But there are many things that are superfluous, is unnecessary. I look very closely at it. This process here is supposed to give us this outcome. But when I start to look at other countries or other organizations that best practice at doing it, they have only 5 steps, but we have 20 steps. But I really propose that we want to get the same outcome, in fact, better outcome, with a lot less effort and time spent in doing it by adapting the frontier processes. Let me assure you, every problem will still be addressed. All the risks are still dealt with, but it really shortened the time by doing the following. And so if you agree with me, we will do this. We'll pressure test it with all the clients and people, because most people, they want outcomes. They are not really interested in the processes. They want the outcomes. If you can assure them to get better outcomes and done quicker, I think they will embrace it. That's how I will say it. And where's the proof of the pudding, the best practice? The real examples of the countries. I can show you exactly how this country or his company A and B have done it. Let me give you a layman example. This is really almost funny, actually, Leon. When I was appointed as a minister in the Prime Minister's office, because it was done in a hurry, I turned up. I didn't have an offer letter yet at the time. Prime Minister announced it. The very next day, I started in my office. I had no security pass to enter my office. And my office to the Prime Minister's office, they were, if I recall correctly, 4 trapdoors to me to enter that. Because I didn't have a pass, I cannot just move from my office to Prime Minister's office. I have to get out from the building to enter from his side through the car park to go through a normal process. So this was going on every day for 2 weeks. So I couldn't tahan lah. So I then went to see the supervisor who's in charge. He said, look, the process is complicated. So I asked him, is it because they are inefficient? No. So do you really want to know why? He said, yeah, I want to know why. He said, all the guys who are here, they're very competent. But because we have a system and a process that says the Prime Minister's office is the highest security. That's one rule, number one. And the process says before issuing the security pass, there must be an employment letter. No employment letter cannot. So the guy says, if there is an employment letter, I can issue the security pass within 1 minute. The guy said, you just sit here and take the photo, it's done. Put your thumbprint, it's done. In 1 minute. So for those people who think that, the problem with slow government processes is because officers are inefficient. That story tells me, even if you send the guy in charge there, send him to Harvard to do an MBA, send him, he will still take him the same amount of time because the process is the problem.
Correct. There's the problem with the certain
systems. Nothing to do with the
play.
person. The system, you got to change the system. Yeah. So I went to see the Prime Minister. I said to him, sir, do you realize the last two weeks, every single day I want to come to your office. I can't come straight to your office. I have to go out from the building to enter. I can't use because I don't have this. But I found out the system says there is one thing that can be done to bypass it. That you send a letter to me to say that you will now bypass this. That's actually an exception to it. So I got a letter written by Prime Minister Najib, Dato Sri Najib, to say that bypass the system because Idris is working here. Indeed, when I brought the letter and the guy immediately issued it. So really, when you think about this, that's another system. You call it the stupidity of the system. I was already working there. And this is under the Prime Minister's office. Every day I turn up there.
Yep.
I'm not a criminal, And I will tell you another one. This is not so small, but very significant. I was appointed 3 years ago as a chairman of the Policy Review Committee for higher education in Malaysia. So when I was doing that role as the chairman of the review committee, I asked all the vice chancellors of all the universities and the registrars and the officers, what is preventing you from implementing this blueprint? Because we had a blueprint, and the blueprint was a lot of hindrances were in the way, so they didn't fulfill it exactly as per the blueprint. So we interviewed all the private universities and public universities. So I wanted them to tell us exactly what is the problem. You wouldn't believe it, Leon. The total number of problems raised by them was 874. Everything was a problem. And I give you 2 examples, very simple one, but 2. Totally unnecessary. Let's say there's a student from the UK who's studying in University of Malaya, doing his bachelor degree in business. First class honors. He passed it. Then he applies to do his master's degree. He got the place because first class honors. He's been living there. He's been on campus for the last 2 years. But our immigration law says that student cannot go through to do the master's unless he leaves Kuala Lumpur and fly back to London. He must go back to London and take the flight from London back to begin his master's degree. That is totally unnecessary and ridiculous. I don't think there's any other country that has such a rule. But that's what we have. That's one example.
Yep.
Another example is this. Let's say Taylor's University. The classroom for business administration is crowded. And they want to expand the classroom, renovate it to enlarge it so that they can double the capacity so that more students can come. I believe we're the only country in the world where you have to go to the Ministry of Higher Education to get the approval. You have to get the approval. But it will take time for them to go there because they're not always available to go there and check everything there, follow the rules to check it. All other countries, if you want to do building, there's normal building approval for building anything. No need to go higher education. Certificate of fitness, all the approval is always standard. If you want to build this house, you got to go through the process of making sure it follows the bylaws and you follow the rules and regulations. You don't add another process on top of that. You need the Ministry of Higher Education approval to just extend the classroom. That's another one I just gave you 2 of the 874. This is the problem because people are not moving to get to outcome because they're full of checks and approvals along the way. So really what we were really telling them, let's get rid of these unnecessary hindrances so that things will move very, very fast and follow the best practices. So at that time when we were doing this, we looked at countries around the world in best practices. We laid them on the table exactly as I said, and I really encourage the government to embrace the change and do that to speed up the process.
One of the things that I've personally been reflecting on a lot actually is the way that we also communicate internally, both internally but also externally in teams. Now, traditionally, in the past, I think I would probably have spent most of my communications on email and meetings. But I have found that over the years, and I think maybe this is in part due to the fact that in the last couple of years, I've been working in a church environment. In a church environment, you're basically doing event management on a weekly basis because you have your weekly, your Sunday services. But beyond that, you also have a lot of midweek events, both trainings, coachings, other sorts of events, a lot of events that happen in the weekday as well. And so we realized that in this environment, you don't have the luxury of time or money to be able to put together fancy PowerPoints, which was something that I was very used to doing. And I found that to be a nice thing to hide behind for myself. And also it had become a little bit of my identity, or I'm good at doing these fancy PowerPoints. But in this environment, I had no choice because we just didn't have time. And so what I found myself doing a lot of is no decks anymore. And so how I framed it is I would only do a deck if there needed to be a teaching component to it. So let's say maybe this is a town hall, a larger audience, and then maybe you need to do an element of teaching material. Then I would do a deck. But if you realize that most of the work that you're doing is operational, what do you need to do if you are handling operational work? You need to move things across the line quickly. And how do you move things along the line quickly is you've got to simplify not just the actual tasks at hand, but you've also got to simplify the way that you communicate, the way that you also get approvals from your bosses, and even the way that you cascade information down. And so we realized, what's the easiest way to do that? It's not through lengthy emails, it's not through long PowerPoints, but sometimes the easiest thing to do is to put your key points in a WhatsApp. So we found ourselves doing a lot of WhatsApp updates as opposed to decks, as opposed to long emails. And we found that really increased our churn rate. And I think to add another level to it, I thought that we were pretty efficient and we had a pretty good way of approaching things like this. But I recently saw a LinkedIn post from Stephen Bartlett, actually. And the post was titled, "I'm at absolute war with scheduled meetings, not because I'm antisocial, but because I did the maths." And so he goes on to explain how much time we spend unnecessarily in meetings. He said that 90% of my scheduled meetings could have been a voice note, 70% of my calls could have been an email, 60% of my emails could have been a text. Now, I thought this was interesting because he goes on to describe a framework for him. There's some things that we do, but there's some things that actually I don't really do as intentionally, but I think I want to start to adopt. So the simple framework is what needs a meeting. So situations where body language and trust building matters. So this one differs from mine. Mine is, I feel like, I add if there's a teaching component, I think you need to present it, make it a bit more visual. But in his case, anything where body language or trust building matters. Okay. The next, what needs a call? So something that has more emotional and sensitive conversations. I like that he included this. What warrants a voice note? To add a greater feeling of connection and human context to quick questions. So updates and feedback. So something that we practice as well. And then the other one is text or email, where text or email is enough. So information transfer, yes or no questions, FYIs, everything else. And then he lastly kind of packages that with what he calls the 7-minute rule. If the discussion can be handled in 7 minutes or less, asynchronously, voice note, email, text, then it doesn't need a meeting. And sometimes you don't necessarily need to eliminate as well. The other option is you could maybe make your updates portion of a meeting a little bit more efficient. So maybe you find a way to do some of the more update tactical stuff online. And then you use those spaces instead to do a bit of teaching and learning. And so that means that as we're doing that we're constantly finding pockets for leadership development on a weekly basis. And so I thought this was interesting. But I think it brings me to maybe the final point that we can explore and to close with is this idea of whether or not speed and depth are at odds with one another. In order to be fast, is there a danger that we sacrifice depth sometimes and the proper way of doing things?
Certainly. Life is a trade-off. There is always a question of speed. There are certain things that you give up in doing. But always, my view is you must be clear with your true north. What's the measure of success? What's the outcome you're interested in? And if that is the thing that determines how you're going to play the trade-off between depth and speed. Because it's the outcome determines what you really want. If this is the outcome you want, then you say this is the right trade-off. How much of depth do you require for what kind of speed is needed to get? But this is the outcome, must be beginning. Because if you're not clear about the outcome, then you're going to be confused about how to deal with this. Before long, it's laissez-faire. You've empowered somebody down the line to come with a process. And the process has completely got nothing to do with the outcome. They will tell you all sorts of things. You must remember, Leon, there was a time prior to the pandemic, entering Singapore is a very simple activity. Filling a form, it was very simple. Now, although it is automated, you have to fill a very, very complicated form to enter Singapore today. Very complicated. They ask you all sorts of things before you even arrive there. Of course, when you arrive there, it's simpler when you already pre-fill it. But that was something that came as a result of COVID. COVID is gone. It's still there. Even the best of the best. Singapore is an example. I was giving them as the best example. Therefore, pray to the fact that COVID is gone, but the system continue. Nobody sat down and said, well, this we introduced as checks before at the time. That's unnecessary now. And so you have to make life simple. That's why we use the word SR. Eliminate first. Get rid of unnecessary things. Simplify, standardize, and automate. So if you automate something that is an old process, that's a terrible thing to do. You should get rid of the old processes and simplify, then only automate. If you think now in the last 5 years, Leon, one of the single biggest thing that has improved convenience and speed in this country is none other than ordering food online. I mean, and also what has happened is that waste has made life so simple for drivers. It was so complicated before, Leon. You need somebody to study the map reading, sit there and help you to navigate. Now, no need. All those are simple. So if somebody should give an award to Grab for making life so easy. You can order food, they'll bring it to your house. It's so simple today. And so this is a very simple service that is rendered by Grab, because people innovated it and found a completely different way to disrupt the current process and doing it. And so those are simple things. Yeah. Talking about Malaysia, when you say Malaysia, we got a problem with bureaucratic process, but there's one thing we do in Malaysia is world class. The
Passports.
Urban Transformation System Center, UTC, that allowed for us to get the passport, IC, and driving license all approved online. In all of that, I mean, we're best practice in the world. So the question today is, if in one part of government we are world class, how come the rest of the government cannot adopt this? But it requires a leadership. It requires the guys at the top to say, I want it done in an hour. Tell me how to do it. That's the big result and the fast result, BFR. The leadership must insist on BFR. If the leadership says, I want this, tell me how to do this. I give you 2 months to figure out how to do it. I can tell you they'll follow the BFR approach. Find the best practice, localize, contextualize it, and implement it. That's the only way to go, Leon.
A leader is essentially the chief simplifier, if you like. And I think good place to end today's podcast. I want to just also close by a quote for us to maybe ponder on, and it's by E.F. Schumacher. And he says that any fool can make things bigger and more complex, but it takes a touch of genius to move in the opposite direction. So let that be something that we all reflect on in the things that we're doing. I think the big question is, how can we invest in the simple things, and how can we move things forward by focusing on what's simple enough to be able to action now. Thank you all for listening to yet another episode of The Game of Impossible. We hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you enjoy conversations like this, we put up episodes every Friday at 6 a.m. on both our YouTube as well as Spotify. We encourage you to subscribe to those channels. We also have short form content on both our IG as well as TikTok at The Game of Impossible. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.